All right, and we are going again for the comparison table because you might be wondering which of these scanners should I use. Now, I haven't included Recon NG because port scanning is just a small part of it, but we can include it later. So don't be surprised if it is in your lesson material. When it comes to speed, we can see that mass is very good and reliable for big networks. When it comes to customizability, by the way, and Map Naboo, they are also really good when it comes to speed. Don't worry too much about that. Customizability, of course, you can change a lot of options. Naboo is a little bit newer, so it's not as feature rich as the other, but it is definitely worth using. When it comes to operating systems, they're all cross platform. That's why I said it doesn't really matter which OS you have. You can run this on a freaking potato. When it comes to types of scans, we have various types of scans that we can do with Nmap, not just TCP, UDP, but also the SYN scan. We can do that with other tools as well, but there's also things like null scan, Christmas scan, and we're going to dive deep into all of these options. When it comes to output format, that's also a really important one because you want to be able to read what you have done. You want to be able to interpret the results. And here we can see that Nmap definitely has a lot of options available. The other ones have options available as well. But the good thing is you can even put mass-scan into an output format, which you can ingest in Nmap. So you can use that scripting engine that Nmap is integrated with, but mass-scan and Naboo are not. When it comes to detection of firewalls, IPSs, basically because of the types of scans, these things can run properly. They can be like, when it comes to detectability, it's of course all about how you set it up yourself. Now, the choice between the three options will become a lot more clear. But what you will often do is if you have big networks, you will scan with mass scan, see which ports are open, and then you will funnel that into Nmap. Now, Boo is also a good choice in this regard, but again, it's a little bit newer, so support might be a little bit less, but it's still a great port scanner. Don't dismiss it and use these yourselves. Throughout the course, we're going to go through all of these scanners. I expect you to use these all yourselves. We're going to go through the documentation here, and we're going to go over some PowerPoints with some examples. Now that you have a little bit more of an idea of the overview, don't get don't get overwhelmed yet. There's no reason to get overwhelmed in this instance. Just calm down. Make sure that you understand that each tool has a situation into which it can be used, and we'll go over those later. Now, I hope you're ready to dive deep because we're going to go over the documentation and the PowerPoints, my friends. Let's stop recording and go to the next one. Alright, dear rat friends, now let's move on to Netcat. Netcat is really easy in this instance, and I'm not going to waste my breath too much on it. It's really easy. Netcat-z-v, or you can just do -zv. So in this case, here we have our host that's getting scanned for, as you can see, the 101st port. So that's not the top 1000 or the top 100, that's the 101st ports. Now, that Z in this case is going to indicate that if it is able to connect to the target on that port, and it's going to try to send some data, and if it succeeds, you're going to see that using the verbose option. Now in here, that verbose option will give you guys an example in just a second. It's really easy, but if you, let's say you want to scan for every single port on a target, that's also possible, of course. Input options are much more limited here, but you can always make your own script if you really want to, though I don't see why you would need to, unless you're in a very limited situation, of course, where you only have Netcat available. Let's see that you hacked onto a machine, you want to scan the internal network, well, you might only have Netcat available. So in this case, we have a very real, this is just a very simple solution to a problem which might be very limited, but of course you're not going to be using this as your daily driver. All right, so here we're going to give you a really simple example of that. We're going to use ZV, like we said before. If you manage to connect to a port on hexpert.com, we want you to send some data, and we want you to do it verbose for the first 1000 ports in this case. And as you can see, it will slowly go through each port, and it'll say, oh, I found something on this port. Now it's trying to connect on port 25, might take it a little bit longer. As you can see, it's not as fine-tuned as some of the other scanners, but if you're very limited, know that you have potential. All right, friends, so what does it take? How long does batch scanning take? We have a little bit of a script for you that's going to scan on 3 IP addresses, TCP ports 1 through 100. So that's not UDP, but TCP. And in here, we can see the script itself. So we have an nmap doing a -p 1 through 100 for ports 1 through 100 and 3 IP addresses stated. As we can see, it took only 2.61 seconds to scan all 3 IP addresses, but let's make it a little bit prettier, shall we? In this case, we also want output to appear. As you can see, we have the -on flag active. It's going to say scan completed, the results, and we can see the results as we find them. So if a host is up, if a host is down, just making it a little bit fancier, a little bit of a script for you to use. We can also do this in Python if we want. We are going to use nmap as, of course, we need to do pip3-install or pip install if you are using Python to nmap, and then we can use nmap as a Python module. We're going to define our targets with the ports as well, and we are going to do an nmap scan. We're going to print the results pretty for you, and this is your result. Why does all of this matter? This is just baseline for you to get started on. We want you to expand this yourself to properly have a starting script so you don't always run the same commands. But just some examples of how it's run. It only takes a few seconds to scan a few ports, my friends. These scripts are really easy to write yourself. Just copy and paste them and run. Of course, you might need to install some extensions such as the nmap for Python, but that shouldn't be a problem at all. You're a hacker after all. Now, Angry IP Scanner, my friends, we have to mention this as well. It's cross-platform, meaning we can run it in Windows, Ubuntu, Mac, older Linux versions, older Windows XP, it's all supported. Well, in this, we can run it on, as we can see, IP ranges with a specific host name, and we can tell it to do an IP range with a specific port scan as well. We had to mention this tool. It's another tool in your arsenal. It's not one that we use very often ourselves, but if you need a tool and you can't run any of the others, this might be an option. Just know that Netcat can be used as well, though. All right, everybody, welcome to this port scanning course. You might be thinking port scanning is something that is well known. Everybody should know it. Well, I see mistakes being made daily. We're going to try to change that in this course. Now, what do we have in store for you? Let me share my screen real quick so you can also see. First of all, we are expecting quite a long runtime from this course. Why is that? Because we really want to highlight all different options. We don't just want to go into several options. We are going to give you a cookbook. We are going to give you some things that you can look for, some things that you can look after, and basically recipes to use. That's what we're after, aren't we all? Now, what we're going to teach you in this course is to confidently and repeatedly bring good results to the table with port scanning by selecting the correct tool, by scripting these tools together, and by eventually getting to a situation where you know exactly what to do in every type of scan that is expected from you. Now, we do expect you to know something about ports, so some very basic prerequisites, understanding of networking concepts. We also expect some knowledge of command line interface because a lot of these tools will be CLI based. some familiarity with programming concepts, because we're going to give you scripts that you're going to have to read, but you don't have to make them yourself, of course. And we're going to give you some exposure to the security concepts inside and out ourselves, but we expect you to know at least a little bit what support, why should it be open, why shouldn't be open. All of these things are important in this course. As for the syllabus, you can see that we have quite a few things in here. We're going to start off with the comparison table in a little bit, but I just want to highlight that we're going to at least highlight Nmap, Naboo, Mass Scan, TCP port scanner, Netcat as well, because yes, that can be used for port scanning, and we've included Recon NG even. So I hope you guys are ready. What you need for this course is at least a basic Linux installation, a basic Windows installation, or a basic Mac installation. Doesn't have to be big. Believe me, you can run these port scanners on a Raspberry Pi if you have to. So I hope that makes things a little bit more clear, and I hope you guys are ready to fly into the game, because I am, and we're going to kick ass. Let's go, baby! Masscan. Why won't we want to use Masscan? Now, Masscan is a scanner that is, like the name says, intended for scanning more massive networks or IP ranges. You don't want to scan a massive network with Nmap because it's going to take a lot longer, although Nmap has a lot more advanced capabilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Masscan first on this massive network to see what's open, and then we're going to feed those results into Nmap. First of all, we need to specify which ports we're going to use. So for example, port 80,443, but we have much more input options available there. Let's say that you want to run Masscan from a specific interface. We can also do that. Let's say that we have a list of targets that we want to scan from a file. That's also possible, of course, with the input list flag, and we can also use the rate flag, but know that the rate flag -- rate that is going to be specifying the number of packets per second to send. There we go. So if we want to output all of our results, we can do that in a greppable format. So let's say that we want to do a mass scan of a specific range, and we want to output that greppable. We add the OG flag or -- output greppable. We can also use the output XML or OX flag, and that's of course going to give us an XML result. But let's say that we run mass scan and we just want it to be a little bit more verbose. We can specify that with the -v option or -- verbose. We can also set it to do a SYN scan or TCP SYN, or if we know that our hosts are online, we can disable host discovery or disable that ping. That sometimes, for example, a host will disable ICMP packets. Well, we might know it's online, so we want to disable ping. We can also randomize the order of targets we want to scan with the -- randomize hosts option. So those are just some of the main flags, but be sure to also scan the help files for the mass scan, because there are more flags available, of course. We will give you some examples. As you can see, we're scanning port 1 through 65,535 with this command, with just a single IP address. That's not where mass scan shines, of course. We might want to set a range of IP addresses, or we just want to set an input file. We can also do this with host names, by the way. Here's an example of that rate command with 1000 packets per second, but remember that's not requests per second, that's packets per second. We can also scan when we want the output to be greppable, for example, OG, and we can send a target for open ports with, for example, output XML format. If we want to do a SYN scan, we can do that as well with the -ss flag behind it. When it comes to port definitions, we have quite a few options. We can use a single port, we can use a range of ports, or we can just add the ports after each other with a comma. We can also, if we know a common port, for example, SSH is open on port 22, or we want to scan for port SSH, we add a -p SSH behind it. That will make, for example, the most used flag, the most used port protocol on that flag, I should say, protocol on that port, it should scan for that. Now here, of course, we might want to output mass scan to nmap. How do we do that? Well, first we need to output things in a greppable format. What I do is first I run my mass scan with output greppable, and then I grab the hosts and I print the open ports to a file openports.txt, and then I'm gonna run nmap, not with -p dash, of course. That needs to be corrected with sc, sv, etc. A little bit of a script here that does exactly the same. So if we go through it from the beginning, these are just if we don't have two parameters, then we expect to echo the help. Then we're going to put parameter 1 in target and parameter 2 in the ports that we want to run on, and we are going to run mass scan. Then we are going to run mass scan, of course, with the output greppable, and we're going to grab that output for those open ports, and we're going to run nmap on those open ports with the -sc and sv flag for banner enumeration, and we want to do the scripting engine that nmap default has built in. Then we're going to go for that openports.txt file on the target, and we want to output in all formats. If you want to use the script, use it, but make sure you are using it to the fullest advantage. Make sure you check out the nmap section to make sure that you're running the proper nmap command, of course. And I hope this helps a little bit in getting you started on scanning those bigger networks. Yes, this is Dr. Wesley speaking. We are ready to talk about Naboo. Please come in patient. So Naboo is also a port scanner, which is pretty recent. We have several ways of inputting, ways that we, for example, if we just want a host, we can input the -host with several options. We can also make sure that we enter a list, for example, which is going to, in this case, they refer to host.txt. It's going to contain the host names, which we can exclude certain hosts from. Same for that range. If we have a specific range set, here is maybe a bad example. A better one would be 1 to maybe 100 and exclude number 1.2. That would be a good range with exclude hosts, or list with exclude hosts. It depends. You can also have the same for an exclude file. So we have several different input options there, and also for excluding that input. When it comes to output, we have ways of outputting as well. Duh. Well, the normal way is, of course, just outputting to terminal, but you can also do the -o command, which will output to a specific file. So in this case, results.txt, as you can see on screen here. Now, we can also try the same for JSON format, but as you can see, we are piping it out there because it is just outputting it in JSON format and not specifically writing it to a file. And we can also do the same for CSV format. That's because other tools might work better with these specific file formats. So there's a pro tip: if you want to pipe into another tool, make sure that you have the right format. Otherwise, you're going to do a lot of pre-processing and it's going to suck, believe me. When it comes to port specifications, so of course we can input the hosts that we want to scan, but also port specification is going to be an important one because we don't always want to scan all ports. Now we have that port option here, in which we can, of course, do the same. We can set a range of ports. We can just set a few ports. We can do a combination of it separated by a comma. As long, the combinations there are endless, but a better way to go about it, maybe for some of you, would be to use that top ports command. If you just want to scan the top ports, but not just the top 1000, maybe the top 5000 or something. Well, here you have the top ports command for that. The exclude ports works the same as the exclude file or the exclude item or the exclude host that we saw before. It's just going to exclude from a specific range, for example, and we can import from a file as well. The pf flag is used for that. For the port threshold PTS, it's going to, here we go, it's going to set a threshold for the number of ports that will trigger a full port scan. So that means if we have 100 ports open, we're going to trigger a full port scan. All right, now on to the next one, exclude CDN. This is also, strangely enough, maybe for some of you, in the ports section, but CDNs are related to that, of course. we can exclude this CDN flag here. And why is it related? Because if we skip the CDN, if we don't check for content delivery networks, then we might only want to check for specific ports here. Well, that's what this is for. We can do the exclude CDN or display CDN for knowing what specific CDN is used in that instance. Can be useful as well. So we have quite a few options there. When it comes to rate limiting, it is really important that you learn how rate limiting works properly. So in this case, we have a rate limit flag, which you can set here with the dash rate, and a rate limit flag with the dash C as well. Now, what's the difference? One is going to give the number of concurrent threads. One is going to give you the rate. You can already guess which one, the packets per second rate that is. So the dash rate, of course, is going to say how many packets per second can be sent, and the dash C is going to say how many threads can be spun up. If you increase the amount of threads, it's going to help speed up your scan in some cases, but remember that it will also slow down the computer that you're running it on, or the machine, I should say. Of course, we have the rate as well, which we can send along. This is also going to, as you guys know, Nmap, for example, has that T, the timing flag. That's what this rate limit flag is very related to. I'm not going to say the same exactly, but it's all related to intrusion detection systems, how aggressive your scan is going to be. So that's just a few options there. Why is it important? You need to abide by the rules that are set by your client. If they say you can only have this many requests per second, then you might need to tune something up here. If you can only have that many packets per second, if you can only have that many concurrent threads, that's going to be up to you, that proper calculation there. But just so you know, always scanning at full speed is probably going to land you in trouble at some point. You're going to knock out a production server, which you shouldn't, and believe me, you don't want to be the person sending the mail. I'm sorry, sir, but I knocked over your server after not abiding by your rules. As for the configuration flags, we also have the scan all IPs flag. Of course, scan all the IP addresses associated with a DNS record. So let's say that I enter hexpert.com and I have multiple IP addresses associated with it. I can ask it to scan all IPs. Another option would be the IP version, the IV string. It specifies if you want to use IP version 6, 4, or both, of course. Then we have the scan type. As you guys know, we have that SYN scan, we have the connect scan. Those are methods which you can execute here with these type of flags. We also have the source IP if you're scanning from behind a, so in this case, if you're scanning from behind a firewall, no, sorry, what am I saying? From behind a VPN, or if you are going to avoid specific firewall restrictions, you can also maybe make it seem like the request is going to come from the local host. We have the interface list, a list of all the available network interfaces and their associated IP addresses. Might be useful. The interface list tells it which interface to use. Sometimes you want to use it on a specific interface because it is connected to a specific network. Then you use that interface flag. Then we have that Nmap flag. It's deprecated, no longer properly functional, but you can always pipe it yourself into an Nmap scan, of course. We have that Nmap CLI related to the Nmap command as previously shown. You might still be able to get it to work properly, but as far as I'm aware, it's deprecated at the moment of recording. We have the -R flag. If you want a custom DNS resolver, then you can specify that with the -R flag. And we have a proxy flag as well. Of course, if you want to use a SOCKS 5 proxy, you can use that with Naboo-scan. If you need authentication, you use the proxy auth with that. And then we have the resume scan. Let's say that you have been running a flag and it got interrupted. Well, it can resume from a resume.cxv file, .cfv file, config file, of course. This can be very useful if you get interrupted for some reason. You want to resume later on, you can. There's an option for it. Your stream flag, which enables the, which disables resume Nmap, verify, retries, shuffling, and other options that are not compatible with streaming. So if you, for example, want to do a continuous stream of targets, a continuous stream of scans on a target or set of targets, there are certain options that are not compatible with that, and you can use that dash stream there. For passive, it tells Naboo to display passive open ports using the Shodan Internet DB API. It can be useful if you want to identify open ports on a target without actually scanning it. Of course, we can use our dear Shodan for that. IRT, input read timeout duration. The flag specifies the timeout for input read. So if you want to, so by default it's going to wait for 3 minutes. You can set that to longer if you want the if you want Naboo, like let's say that, how do you, let's say in this case that Naboo is going to ask you a question. It's going to wait for input. How long do you want it to keep waiting for input? That's what this flag is basically going to set. Sorry, a little bit of a hard concept to understand maybe, but just imagine you're prompting you for some input. How long should it prompt you for before saying, hey, Dork, wake up, I need some input here? No, standard in disables the std in processing. You can use it to prevent Naboo from, of course, processing the input from std in. What does that mean? Key interruptions, for example. Now we have host discovery options, a lot of them as well. We can do host discovery itself. That's only host discovery in that case, and it's only going to see which are online, which hosts, which of the, let's say that you have a range of maybe 100 IP addresses, which one of those are online with a ping command. You can also skip that, because let's say that you know for a fact that your target is online, but it's just filtering those ICMP packets. Well, then you can use the -pn to skip that host discovery process entirely. You can also use the probe TCP SYN. This is for a SYN scan. You can use the PA probe TCP ACK. This is the specifies the TCP ACK ping probe to be used by Naboo for host discovery. You can have the probe ICMP echo flag, in this case specifying that the ICMP echo requests ping probe to the ICMP echo request ping probe to be used by Naboo for host discovery. So that's just your ICMP. Use your ICMP if you do host discovery. You can also do it, set it to probe ICMP timestamps. In this case, it's going to use the ICMP timestamp request, so not an echo request, but a timestamp. You can also request an address mask from ICMP, and if all of these terms sound strange to you, don't worry, they are. It's just ICMP is the packet that is sent from a ping request, and you can use ICMP echo saying, hey, just send me some text, or you can say, give me the timestamp, give me the current timestamp, and then if your host responds, then you know, okay, through ICMP, it's up with the timestamp request being made. You can also do the same for address mask. In this case, the address mask request ping probe is going to be used, of course. Don't look too deep into this if you're just starting out. If you've gone through this course already, now is the time to dive more into these options, but we'll get to that in the practical section as well, of course. When it comes to ARP ping, don't address request poisoning or something. I need to really brush up on my networking skills. Editors, please cut that out. But it's the there you're going to request the ARP ping being used for a host discovery, and then the ND ping is the neighbor discovery from the IPv6 protocol. That's all different options for host discovery. So as you can see, you can quite finely tweak that and tune that. But in this case, what a lot of people are going to be fine with is sometimes they just know that the host is up. They need to skip host discovery, or they just need to see which ones are online from an entire network SN. Most of the other options are probably not going to be used, but I need you to know what all of them are for. All right, my friends, on to the next section. All right, everybody, welcome back. Now, today we're going to talk about Nmap. It's your favorite rat, talking about your favorite port scanning tool. What can go wrong about this beautiful day? right? So we're going to go over some often used flags. Now, don't get me wrong, we're going to go over the complete list of features as well, but I want to give you a cookbook. I don't want to flood you with information. So let's do that first. Now, you've all heard about the TCP three-way handshake. If you haven't yet, it's a it's a SYN-ACK message. Basically, TCP, when a connection is made, it's a connection full protocol, meaning that you make a connection with a message, you send a sync message, then you get an acknowledgement back, and you send a SYN-ACK back, your SYN acknowledgement. So that three-way handshake can also be interrupted. We can send a SYN, we can get back an ACK, but we can never send a SYN-ACK. That's also a possibility. That's the first scan, a SYN scan, also called a stealthy scan, because it's much harder to detect. In this case, this is a I would recommend starting with a SYN scan because it's the least detectability. If you're going for little detectability, you will always have to do this. When it comes to TCP connect scan, that's going to be a basic scan that's always going to happen. But you can also add UDP flags for UDP ports. Now remember, that's going to take a lot longer. We'll go over the general course document in a bit as well. As for version detection, we can also do that. What software is running on this board? What version does it have? When it comes to OS detection scan, what computer are we talking to? What device? What OS is running on it? That's also a possibility. And you guys all know that scripting is a possibility in Nmap. It has its own scripting engine with its own vulnerability scan scripts on board. So we can scan that with the SC flag. Now going on to the ping scan, that's the SN flag. And in this case, we're just going to see if a host is online or not. If we already know a host is online or not, we can also add different things, because the way Nmap works is first it does a ping, basically ICMP package, ICMP protocol, but the server might be set to block ping messages, might be set to not respond to ping messages. So sometimes we know that a server is online, sometimes we want to know which servers are online only and not which ports. That is a ping scan. Now there's different modes. We've already talked about the SYN scan. We can also add a port flag. And of course, we can do that with different ways. We'll look at the input for ports as well. The OS detection flag has been talked about, but if you, let's say you want version detection, you want OS detection, you want script scanning, you want the trace route, we have the A flag to include it all. So that's an option that you can use. Give it a shot. You will see that it's very useful that you don't always have to type the other flags. Timing templates, what we always recommend, or what we often see, is that T4 is being used. Now, T4, what does that mean? It's pretty quick in its scanning. It's going to go pretty detectable. When we go for paranoid, we take it easy. It's not about detectability. I mean, of course, it's about the server being online or not, because we can kill the server completely. Our T4 might be way too fast. The server might not be able to handle it. So we go onto paranoid mode, T0, T1, T2. Give these options a shot. Don't be stuck on T4 only, because a lot of people use T4, but they don't really know what that means. If you want output while it's scanning, so more verbose output, you can add the -v flag. And output is also going to be a big one that we're going to go over. But remember, these are just a few capabilities. There are a lot more, and I want you to go through the other videos in this topic as well. Some examples here is host discovery. Is the host online or not? We can also do a port scan for all ports. This can also be replaced by -p-. You don't have to do this, but I just wanted to illustrate that it can be a range as well of ports with this one. And here we have version detection enabled. And again, we can replace this with -p-. So here we have some options for OS detection as well. You might see some of these options. Combine them. Here we have that -p- that I was talking about with version enumeration and OS detection. We can also add scripting engines to this. The order in which you're going to execute is going to determine how successful you are, in my opinion. Because if you're going to execute a big all-out UDP scan all of a sudden, well, you're going to wait a long time. And I don't like my people just waiting. I like them doing a small scan and then working their way up so they can already investigate the results of these smaller scans. We have UDP scans as well, and then we have the script engine, but we can also just use SC for this. But if we want to determine which scripts it will execute, for example, the HTTP and HTTPS scripts only, we can say dash dash script equals, and then we say HTTP star. Then it's going to get the HTTP scripts and execute them. Here we have a scan with specific ports, secure shell and web servers, with version enumeration on OS detection with the T4 timing template that we talked about. So interesting, really interesting if you want to combine a little bit more, of course. But remember, for combinations, you really need to make sure that in this case, you're going to do a small scan first and feed the results of the small scan into the bigger scans. What they probably did here was an nmap command, and then we found that port 2280 and 443 were open. Okay, then we're going to investigate them more thoroughly. We can also, let's say that we have a giant network and we want to see which hosts are online. This is that ping sweep that I was talking about. This just does a pin sweep scan. All right, so these are some ways of scanning. Now, try them on hexpert.com. Don't just take my word for it. You have this documentation, try it. More input, ways we can input differ. We can have a single IP address. You already saw me use a range before. That's a subnet, of course. This is literally just a range from 0.1 to 100. But we can also have a subnet. Now, let's say that we have hexpert.com. Can it do that? Yes, it can, because it will do a translation to IP address first before it does its scan in that case. But let's say that we have a giant file of hosts. Our scope is massive. Well, we can do an input with a file as well, -il targets.txt, or whichever your file is named, of course. We can also just separate them with a comma, the IP addresses, or we can exclude specific items from a range. Let's say that we don't want 10 to 20 from this range. Well, we can use the --exclude flag. I expect you to pause this video and every time try this, of course. We have some ranges which you can try this on, but in your own home network, you can always try this if you have this as a home network, of course. How can you find out? You can do an IF config on Linux, or you can do an IP config on Windows. There you can see your network and you can do a scan on it if you want. If you want to load balance it, if you don't want to go from 0 to 100 sequentially, you can do randomized hosts as well. That's a possibility. Just so you guys know, sometimes it might be required. Here we have targets from a file and an exclude list as well. We can have an exclude file, just so you know. Now, when it comes to output, we can just do it in the terminal like we all know, or we can do it in XML output, which might be useful for other tools. Greppable output is also very useful because then we can just grep our results and we can get what we need to feed into these other tools that I'm talking about. Of course, vulnerability scanners, for example. Then we have an output all example here as well. We just name it. We don't give it an extension. It will give it the extensions itself. It will be XML, it will be greppable, and it will be in GNMap results. So those are quite a few options. Again, I expect you to try them yourself. Really, really take your time to do this. Don't just take my word for it, and take your time to go through the other videos and PowerPoint presentations here as well. You're going to learn quite a lot about port scanning because I want you to learn everything about it. Now, when it comes to port scanning, I really want you to know that you first do a port scan And then you take the results of that port scan and feed it into other port scans that are much more thorough. Don't go for the thorough ones right away because you will be waiting a long time. And again, I don't like my people waiting. So from now on, I want you to do aimed scans. Don't just scan for every single port. First, scan for every port and see which ports are online, and then do aimed scans at those specific ports. Try all the input options, try all the output options, and view them, see what they actually deliver as a result. All right, amazing hacker, you're well on your way. Let's get started and let's get some port scans going, shall we? Onwards to the next step, brave warriors, because we come across Recon NG. And Recon NG, as you guys might know or not know, it's a popular recon framework, reconnaissance framework. The name says it all. And in here we have several options using the module recon slash hosts, host slash scan. So with this module, we have some options that we can set as well. The target option, dash P for the ports option, the scan type, TCP, UDP, or all. That's just both. Because as you guys might know, SynScan is also a popular one. Christmas scan is also an option. There's many more out there. Then we have the threads, the number of threads allocated to a scan with a rate. Of course, the rate at which the packets are sent in packets per second. The timeout for each probe. If you want the timeout to last longer than default timeout, you can set that here as well. You can set if it should resolve the host name that you provide. Sometimes you want to give it a host name, then it should use resolve. Sometimes you just have the IP addresses, then it doesn't need that, of course. And if you don't want reverse DNS lookup to be performed, you add the dash dash no reverse tag to it. We also have the tag dash dash tag for technology there. But just an example, we're going to get more into it later. But here we're going to see just recon ng. We start it up. We use the module that we talked about. We set the threads. We set a rate limit, a timeout, the target, the ports we want to scan, the scan type, and we run. So this is just going to do a TCP scan of all ports on that IP address with 20 threads with a rate of 10 packets per second. This is something that you really have to set up properly, because if you send too much packets per second, if you send too many threads out, it's going to potentially kill the opposing server. Some of these servers aren't that stable. Sometimes you're even testing in a production server, and you don't want to kill it, of course. And also, I'm one of the very lucky people, very few lucky people that can run on a MacBook Pro. Not everybody has that luxury. So that means that I can set my threads high, because that thread is a local thing. The more threads you set, the more scans can be executed at the same time and stuff like that. But of course, you also run the risk of bogging down your own system. All of these things need to be taken into account, and of course, a timeout of 2 seconds as well. To install it, you just do sudo apt update, and I'm using the Ubuntu installation guide here. I will put other installation instructions in here, of course. The next one is very simple: sudo apt get install python pip python pip, whoa, voice crack, python dev libxml2 libxml2 dev libxslt1 dev the zlib1g dev. So all of those things you can just copy paste if you want to. Then you can clone the repository. I need to remove that E here from the final documentation. And then you can change into that repository, install those requirements if they aren't already installed. And then you run recon ng. So here we can run recon ng. We can get into that same prompt as before, but you need to be careful that recon ng may need to be run with root privileges. So if you get any errors and you're not running as root, try running it as root. There we have different options. So I just shown you guys an example of the host scan, but you also can use the scanner port scan TCP. Definitely an option as well if you want to know what modules there to use specifically. Here I just set my remote host, but I can also set my ports, of course, set remote host, set port, and then we can set a start port and an end port. We have many different modules here to run with. I just included this as a little bit of an extra. This isn't a major part of the course, but since this is a course about port scanning, I felt obligated to at least include this as well. Thank you for watching, and on to the next section. Alright, Marys, if you're watching this, please cut the beginning and end. Hello, amazing hackers. Hope you're doing well today. So, let's talk about what a port really is, because before we can do anything about port scanning, we need to know what a port is. Now, if you're interested, we also have an upcoming boot camp. We're not gonna say too much about it until it's out, but keep an eye out for that, where you will learn the more basics of networking. Now, port scanning is basically, we have a port. It's a logical connection between computers, devices, and remote servers. Basically, a 16-bit number ranging from 0 to 65,535. Now, that port scanning that we're going to do is we're just going to see which ports are open on a system, and it's often compared to doors, and every single door in a house will have a different function then. Well, also every single port will have a different function, and you can put any protocol that function on a port that you wish for. You can, for example, have the HTTP web server, the protocol for a web server on port 80, number 80. Well, that's just a suggestion. That's just your default port usually. Usually it will be on port 80, but you can change that to whatever you like. Same goes for you can put anything on port 80 that you like. Now, we didn't talk about UDP versus TCP as well. We all know the SYN, the three-way handshake. Basically, that is TCP, your transmission control protocol, and that is your one of the most commonly used protocols for transmitting data over the internet, we should say. The other one is going to be UDP, and that is going to be more connectionless. So in this case, TCP is going to make a connection, and UDP is connectionless, meaning there's no need to establish a connection. You can just send data, and that might not always be as stable as your TCP connections. So in summary, UDP and TCP, you need to remember that there's two types there that are very commonly used. UDP is going to be your connectionless protocol. It's going to take longer. You need to take all of these things into account when doing port scanning as well. Now, why is UDP slower? Because there's no guaranteed delivery. We might have packets lossage as well. So we send a packet over to a UDP port, it might get lost in transaction, and since there is no real numbering system, no real sequence for packets in UDP, we might have some network congestion that causes some packet loss. We need to send more packets for UDP. We need to often send multiple packets to really determine the status of a port, and it's handled on the application layer. Some applications that are going to use UDP, such as DNS and NTP, that's your time server, by the way, and your domain naming server. If you have ever used a clock, that is synced by NTP and on a computer, I mean, of course. And if you have ever gone to hackspert.com, for example, there's an IP address bound by that, but you don't want to remember that number, and that's what DNS is for. Now, there are some well-known protocols. Look them up. We're not going to go over every single one, but at least these are very familiar to most people, and I think 21 should be in here as well, which is FTP, so I will add that. But these are some common and well-known protocols. Now, if a port is not open in a pen test, you should always, if a port is open, but a port is not used and you're doing a pen test, you should always report that. Why should you report that? Well, here are some reasons. First of all, the attack surface. So that open port that's not used is extra attack surface for an enemy, for an adversary. So close those unused ports or have them closed, and the number of entry points will be reduced. You might have unpatched vulnerabilities running on that specific port, so take that in mind. that port that is not used can still contain vulnerabilities. It will also make some network noise. It can generate some traffic and noise which can be used by attackers to conceal their activities in, and it might confuse you because you have a port open and it's complexer to manage at that point. You have a port open, you might need to manage that port, you might need to take it into control, you might need to keep an eye on it, so that's important. Now, what can you port scan? Basically, any device that makes a connection through packets or even a connectionless sending string of packets. You can all scan it as long as it has ports open. So that means computers, network devices, mobile devices, even your IoT devices, your web servers, they can all be port scanned for what's open. In general, any device with a network interface. And some general guidelines for port scanning. First, you do your quick scans always, then you do version detection scans, then vulnerability scans, and lastly application layer testing, because it will take a lot longer. It's a different type of scanning, of course, and it's just an example of what type of ports you can scan for, how you can scan. Of course, it's going to be very situational, but now you have an overview of what a port is, TCP versus UDP, why UDP is slower, what specific devices you can scan, some general ports that are usually used, and some general guidelines. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next section. Now we need to talk about Nessus, of course. It's a paid scanner. It costs a lot of money, but it can do port scanning, so we're kind of obligated to talk about it. First of all, we need to install it, and know that there is a free trial available as well. So first of all, you start your scan through the CLI. That's what we usually do at our company. Nessus CLI scan new with a policy name after it and the targets that we want to scan. We have different options there with what we want to scan. Now, when that scan is going on, we can view the results through the scan ID as well. We can list that, we will see that later, which scans are running, but we can also report them with a report ID, a format which can be PDF, CSV, or HTML, and we have a file name that we want to give it. Let's look at that input a little bit more. So let's scan a single IP address. Now we can give it a policy name that is the scan policy we want to use, and we can add a target IP. It can be a single IP like we can see here, or it can be a range of IP addresses, or a subnet even, or it can have a file as input as well. So if you have a list which you have a file of, then you can use that as well. When you want to scan a host name specifically, you can use the target's host name as well. Just know that it's an option. When it comes to output, we have that scan that's going on. We can view the status with scan view, and then the scan ID -- status, and we can list them all with Nessus CLI scan list. If we want to export them, that's also a possibility. We just add a format, for example, HTML, PDF, or CSV, and we add the name as well. Now, if we want to show the details of a report, we can just do Nessus CLI as well. Or if we want to list all of the reports that are available to us, we can do Nessus CLI report list. This, of course, assumes that you have scans started with existing reports to export. The Nessus CLI command might vary a little bit based on the operating system and, of course, the installation method and, of course, the version that you're using, but there's always the help file for your specific version. These are just some general rules, the way that Nessus takes on port scans. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next video. Alright, amazing hackers. So Nmap, of course, it's one of the most used tools for port scanning, but let's go into the basics of Nmap first, because we need to explain what it is. It's a popular port scanner, free and open source, and multi-platform. That's important as well to note. It came from the late 1990s, so it's pretty old, as you might imagine, and it uses a variety of scanning techniques, but it also has things like a scripting engine included, and banner enumeration, version detection, OS detection. It's highly customizable. It has a lot of options, And that's why it is by far the most popular tool being used for port scanning. But as you know from this course already, you need to pick the right tool for the right job. So let's go into the basic usage of it. On Windows, you can simply download it and run the installer. On Linux, it's a simple sudo apt-get update. Let me zoom in a little bit. And sudo apt-get install nmap. And OS X, it's just brew install nmap. You will need brew installed for that, of course, and that should look something like this, where you have your installation on Linux. Now, some common flags. If you want to increase the verbosity level, you can add the -v. If you want to do a sync scan, that's also a popular one. You do the SS option. Now, sync scans, as we know, does not complete the three-way handshake. We have the SU as well for UDP ports. Then we have O for operating system detection. And then we have SV for binary numeration. But we also have SC or -- script for scripting engine. That being said, we can also do an aggressive scan with -A for several scanning techniques combined. And then we have -P as well for listing the ports you want to scan. -T is going to give you your timing template, how aggressive and how fast you're going to run. And IL is going to allow you to input a list of host names, URLs, IPs, whichever you prefer. Some advanced scanning techniques are a ping scan. If we know that the host is online, sometimes when we scan a big subnet, we want to do a ping first. Of course, that's going to happen by default, but sometimes we know that a host is going to be up, so we can add the -SN flag to it. And if we want to do a TCP SYN scan, we just add the -SS flag to it. That looks something along those lines here, and as you can see, it does just fine. When it comes to the TCP connect scan, we can also do that with -ST, but that is usually by default. So just so you know, you don't have to add that. If you want to do the UDP scan though, you will have to add the SU flag there. And as you can see on screen, that is going to show us the ports that are open on UDP front. Feel free to try all of this on labs.hexpert.com, by the way. And then you have operating system detection as well, which will look something along the lines of what you see on screen here. We add the -O, we have our IP address, and we see, okay, the operating system seems to be Linux 2.6.32 with an 88% surety. Then we can also do fragmented scanning if we want with the -F option. And here we're going to fragment packets and send them to a target host. That's usually done in order to bypass firewalls, for example. If we want a network map with nmap, that's also, of course, a big possibility. We can do that manually, but we can also do that through something like a ZenMap. Let's say that we have a big network, we want to scan it. We can also do the nmap script, which is the pre-built scripting engine containing quite a lot of scripts for different protocols found on different ports. Some examples of the nmap scripting engine you can see here. We're going to talk about HTTP, SMB, and DNS examples. In an HTTP example here, we can just add -- script h equals HTTP enum, and it's going to do the HTTP enumeration once, and that's not a huge amount, of course, but we can add on to that as well by just doing HTTP-1 ***. That's going to be a wildcard for our scripting engines. Let's say we want to do form brute forcing on login forms. That is also a possibility. And then we have a sitemap generator as well, for example. Or we can just run shell shock, or we can just run WordPress brute forcing, for example. A lot of people will just run the default scripting engine and leave it at that. I prefer it if it might be a little bit more targeted sometimes from the people that work for me. Nmap is going to include a range of SMB scripts as well, such as SMB OS discovery, as we can see on the screen right here, or the SMB security mode, which checks if the server requires signing, for example. And we have SMB vuln ***, which is going to do all of the SMB vulnerabilities. SMB enumeration can also be executed, and SMB brute forcing can also be executed on the target. We also have SMB2 capabilities, which we can execute, but those are some more edge case scenarios. And then for DNS, we also have DNS brute forcing, which is a very interesting one because a lot of people know subdomain enumeration, but we can also do DNS brute forcing. DNS cache snooping is also a possibility, where we're going to try to retrieve information about any cached DNS records. DNS random as source port is going to, as the name suggests, is going to send a DNS query with a random source port number to test if we have DNS cache poisoning vulnerabilities. We can also try zone transfers automatically through Nmap, or that's of course to discover more host names and other records related to DNS, and we do DNS NSEC enumeration, which is going to perform an NSEC zone enumeration attack on DNS servers. Some best practices and tips. Of course, please always use this tool ethically. Update it regularly so you have the latest scripting engines, the latest techniques. Use Nmap with caution. Be aware of the impact on networks. Slow scans might sometimes be better than fast scans that completely shut down your network. And also, maybe you are with a firewall, maybe you need a SYN scan, maybe you need a ping scan because we know the host is already online. So always use the appropriate options. And if you want more verbosity while it's running, add the -v. You can try different scan types and techniques to gain a better understanding of the network and identifying potential vulnerabilities. And also, you can use Nmap to automate your tasks and perform more complex scans, but be sure to review your scripts regularly and don't just run one blindly. Be patient and allow your scans to complete. So what I usually do is I run them on a VPS with nohub, NOHUP, space, my command, and then space and ampersand. That will run it in the background, and even if my connection gets broken up, the command will still keep running. Document everything. Use the OA command, dash small letter O, capital A. Use that to get your output and keep record of that as well. Use the ping option to skip host discovery -pn, and use the -t option for your timing engines as well. If you want to enable OS, version detection, and script scanning and traceroute, just use the -a option. And also, if you want to include a reason why a port scan is in a certain state, you can use --reason as well to add to your Nmap scripts. If you want to run all scripts, just run the -sc and review the documentation on a regular basis to learn more about some advanced scanning techniques like a Christmas scan. Alright, my friends, that was it for our Nmap presentation. I suggest we move on to some questions. Again, don't hesitate to try any of this on labs.hexpert.com. Let's talk about Naboo, my friends, because Naboo is also a port scanner. We're going to talk about the input, the ports input, the output, of course, rate limiting your tools, because I think that's a very important topic. You might be confronted with it while you are on a client engagement. So make sure you know how to properly rate limit your tools. And we'll also talk a bit about configuration. Now, Naboo is a port scanning tool that's written in Go. It enumerates valid ports for host quickly, reliably. You might notice that if you run with Naboo, you will find the top 100 port scans and not the top 1000, and it's by default going to perform a faster SYN Connect scan on hosts. It's going to list all of those ports, and it's a very simple and straightforward tool. Again, it uses the SYN Connect probe. It's optimized for ease of use. It's lightweight on the resources, meaning that you can run multiple scans on a very simple, lightweight VPS. It can use DNS port scanning as well. It has a passive port enumeration using Shodan, so that way it will not give out any packets directly to your target. It'll just go and query Shodan. Shodan, if you don't know, is a search engine for the internet. It searches for any basically servers with open ports displays it. It displays what's running on those ports, so we can use Shodan as well. We can also have easy Nmap integration for service discovery because that is not done by default by Naboo. It's a port scanner. It's not a scripting engine like Nmap. It's not a banner enumeration slash service discovery tool like Nmap. It's a bit more limited. You can of course have multiple output formats there, and if you add a hostname like hexpert.com, it will resolve it using the default DNS resolver. As input, you all know that we can use a single host. We can use a host list, just a text file, one host per line, or we can exclude also certain hosts from a scan. We can also exclude host list from a scan. So we have a list of hosts that we might want to exclude. That's a possibility. On screen, you will see some examples. For example, Naboo with the host, just a single one, or a list with the -L flag, or you also have a subnet which can be scanned, or we can scan ranges like you see right here, first IP address dash second IP address. Sudo naboo host hexpert.com nmap CLI is going to give you nmap integration, so you can type your nmap commands straight after you run your naboo command. Just naboo your host nmap CLI, and then you run nmap. When it comes to inputting ports, we also have different options, like you can see here, a single port, or just a range or a list of ports, I mean. The TP stands for top ports. You can do that with the top 100 by default, but you can also set it to top 1000, top 5000, whichever you prefer. Excluding ports is also possible with the EP, exclude port flag. And then we have a range as well, 1 through 65,535. Naboo also has several options to control your rate limiting. -rate with an integer sets the scan rate in packets per second, or PPS. A default rate is set to 1000 PPS, but you can also add a scan delay. That is a delay between each scan action. So port 80, scan delay. 81, scan delay. You can also add a timeout if you want. If you think that a default timeout of 5 seconds, 5000 milliseconds, is not enough, if you know that you have a slow network or whatever, you can set it to 10 milliseconds by, for example, setting -timeout to 10,000. Output, we also have several options there, -O, -JSON, -CSV, all very interesting, of course, for your client, for your later gathering or processing of that information. When it comes to configuration, we can use the config for a specific configuration file, -config, and then the string of where that file can be found. There we can set up certain things such as the scan rate, the output format, the flags that we're using, etc. We can also directly run nmap, as we've seen before, the nmap command that is going to be run on the found results, of course. So if you find 5 ports open, it will run nmap on those 5 ports. It's not the intention that nmap's going to do a new port scan here. -resume resumes a scan that's using resume.config. Every time you start a scan, it will make resume.config. You can resume with -resume. And then you can also list the interfaces that are available to the port scanning tool. For example, if you have one network interface that is connected to the internal network and one to the internet, you might want to use the internal network one, and you can list them with interface list. The scan type, by default, we know that's the SYN connect scan, and we can use the -SA or -scan -all -IPs for scanning all other IPs associated with a DNS record. For example, if we have a host name and it has 5 IPs associated with it, we might want to scan all 5. -IP -version as or -IV gives you, of course, the IP version that you want to use. Can be 4, can be 6. Default, it will use IP version 4. And with passive, we are going to use the -passive flag. This is going to just display those open ports with Shodan Internet DB API. Here we have some examples on screen as well. In this example, it's a little bit hard to see, so let me zoom in a little bit. We're just using nabu-host on hexpert.com. Go ahead, give it a try, see what's open, but we can also do nabu and then -l and input a list of hosts. That's also a possibility, as we see here. On the third screenshot, we can see Nabu being run with hexpert.com and then running nmap right after it with the -sv command, nmap-sv. We can see that it first tries to find the ports and then feeds it into your nmap command as follows, nmap-sv, and then feeds the ports with -p, of course, and of course as well the hostname IP address. In the last example, we can see something very similar being done. Again, nmap being run through the nmap CLI, just another example for you. Now go try this out. Go try all of this on hexpert.com. You have my permission to port scan hexpert.com. See what you find there, which ports are open, which versions are open, and try to integrate it with the nmap CLI.